Imagine the vastness of the Eastern Front in 1942. Not a desert of sand, but a desert of mud, snow, and despair. You are the commander of a Soviet T-34 tank, part of an endless column of steel advancing across the devastated terrain. The world outside is a gray, hostile blur, seen through the small observation slit. Inside, the smell of diesel fuel and sweat permeates the air. The engine roars, a constant, brutal sound that vibrates in your bones, drowning out the sounds of war raging in the distance. Your 45mm sloped steel armor is your shell, your fortress. It has withstood the impact of anti-tank guns and the shrapnel of mortars. There is a sense of claustrophobic power, the certainty that as long as the engine runs, you are part of the unstoppable spearhead of the Red Army. But then, something breaks the monotony, a sound that doesn't belong in this earthly hell. It's not the whistle of artillery, nor the distant drone of a high-altitude bomber. It's a sharp, metallic noise, almost like a saw cutting through the air. It approaches fast, flying dangerously low, ignoring the rules of aerial warfare. Your eyes stare at the crack. The silhouette looming on the horizon is strange, angular, almost ugly. A small, twin-engine plane with a nose like a predatory snout. It doesn't maneuver with the grace of a fighter. It dives with the doggedness of a hawk, in a straight, deadly line directly toward your column of tanks. Panic sets in. The other tanks' defensive machine guns begin firing, tracing lines of light across the gray sky. But the plane doesn't swerve. It seems impervious, focused on its prey. In the blink of an eye, it's upon you. A blinding flash, followed not by an explosion, but a sharp impact, a violent punch that hurls your body against the steel walls. The sound is that of metal being ripped apart. The 30mm shell tore through his frontal armor like rotten wood, transforming the tank's interior into an inferno of incandescent shrapnel. The steel fortress became a coffin. This was the nightmare the Luftwaffe meticulously designed to hunt down and annihilate Soviet armored power. The Henschel Hs 129, a machine born with a single, terrifying purpose. But herein lies the great question that runs through its entire history. Was this predator of the skies truly the ultimate weapon that German engineering promised? Or was it a flawed design, a suicidal weapon whose reputation was built on the sacrifice of its own pilots? To understand the soul of the HS-129, we must return to the war labs of the 1930s. Hitler's Germany was rearming at a feverish pace, and the lessons learned from the Spanish Civil War were clear. The future of the battlefield belonged to tanks and air power working in tandem. The success of the Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber was undeniable, but its vulnerability to ground-based anti-aircraft fire was also evident. Luftwaffe strategists realized they needed something new, not a retrofitted bomber, but an aircraft built from the ground up for a single mission: ground attack. In 1937, the Reich Air Ministry launched a competition for a Schlachtflugzeug, a battle plane. The specifications were radical for the time: small, twin-engine, heavily armed, and, most importantly, encased in heavy armor capable of flying through a hell of bullets and shrapnel. Henschel's response was the most daring and literal. Its engineers didn't just add armor plates to a fuselage, they built the fuselage from the armor. The central concept was the so-called Panzerwand, or armored bathtub. The pilot's cockpit was literally a welded steel capsule. The front, protecting the pilot from frontal attacks, was a 75mm thick plate. The rest of the cockpit was protected by 12mm plates, and the windshield was a nearly 8cm block of armored glass. The idea was to create an impenetrable sanctuary for the pilot, but this obsessive pursuit of protection created a monster of problems. To keep the plane's silhouette small and difficult to hit, interior space was sacrificed to an almost inhuman degree. The cockpit was so narrow that the pilot was squeezed in, his shoulders touching the sides. There was no room for a conventional instrument panel. In a bizarre design decision, engineers moved essential engine gauges to the inside of the engine nacelles, forcing the pilot to look out of the cockpit at the wings in the midst of combat. It was an aircraft that required its pilot to be a contortionist amid the chaos of battle. And then came the weight problem. All that armor turned the plane into a 4-ton flying brick. And to make matters worse, the German war machine's priorities dictated that the best engines, the powerful Junkers and Daimler-Benz, be reserved for elite fighters and bombers. The HS-129, being a niche project, received the leftovers. The first prototypes were equipped with captured French Arcus Ace 410 engines, which could barely generate 460 horsepower each. Performance was pathetic. The planes required absurdly long runways, were slow, difficult to maneuver, and had a dangerous tendency to stall. Test pilots hated the machine, considering it unstable and dangerous. Many in the Luftwaffe High Command were convinced the project was a dead end, a noble idea that would never work in practice. The tank hunter, too heavy and weak-willed, seemed destined never to leave the ground. Despite a disappointing start, the Henschel HS-129, when equipped with the appropriate tools, proved to be a formidable adversary, especially against armored vehicles. Its modular configuration allowed for impressive versatility in terms of armament, adapting to different missions and threats. From the outset, the HS-129 could be equipped with a variety of armaments. These included machine guns for engaging infantry and light targets, 20mm and 30mm automatic cannons for more substantial firepower against light vehicles and fortifications, light bombs for general ground target attacks, and rockets that added surprise and high-impact attack capability. The true anti-tank potential of the HS-129 was fully realized with the introduction of large caliber cannons. The 30mm Mk103 already offered considerable penetration capability for its time. However, it was the adaptation of the 75mm PaK-40 anti-tank gun that elevated the HS-129 to a level of terror for tank crews. This gun, originally designed for mounting on ground vehicles, was a monster in terms of firepower. With a single successful shot, it was capable of piercing the thickest frontal armor of a Soviet T-34 tank, a mainstay of the Allied armored forces. This capability transformed the HS-129 into a direct and lethal threat to the most modern and resilient armored vehicles. On paper, and with the right armament, the HS-129 displayed the characteristics of a perfect predator against armor. Its low silhouette, ability to fly at low altitudes, and the concentrated fire of its larger caliber guns made it ideal for ambushing and destroying tanks in open fields or in defensive positions. The philosophy behind its design was clear: to create an aircraft capable of neutralizing the threat that tanks posed to the German front lines. Despite its impressive destructive capacity and the intimidating image it projected, the Henschel HS-129 possessed a chronic vulnerability that ultimately compromised its effectiveness and the survival of its pilots. It was a classic case of an Achilles heel. Although the aircraft's central fuselage had some level of armor protection, essential for the safety of the crew, the most crucial components for its operation, the engines and fuel tanks, were left completely exposed. Located in the nacelles under the wings, these areas were highly vulnerable. This exposure made the HS-129 an extremely susceptible target to damage. A single well-aimed burst from an enemy fighter, or ironically, even from well-aimed ground machine guns, could hit the engines or fuel tanks. The result was almost always catastrophic, an immediate fire that consumed the aircraft, forcing the pilot to make a risky parachute jump, or, in the worst-case scenario, resulting in the complete loss of the aircraft and its crew. Allied intelligence quickly recognized this fatal weakness of the HS-129. Enemy fighter pilots in particular began to be instructed to deliberately target the engine nacelles. This point, which for the HS-129 was a blind spot in its own defensive capabilities, turned what should have been an armored hunter into easy and vulnerable prey. The aerial war became a hunt for the hunter, where the primary tactic was to exploit this design flaw to neutralize the HS-129's threat before it could even deploy its powerful armament. This duality between impressive firepower and critical vulnerability defines the history of the Henschel HS-129, an aircraft that was both a nightmare for tanks and a tempting target for enemy pilots. The HS-129's production and loss statistics paint a grim picture of its short and dangerous operational life, highlighting the high price paid for its mission. Between 1942 and 1945, Germany produced approximately 870 HS-129s. However, the vast majority of these aircraft did not survive the conflict. Combat losses were extremely high, not only due to enemy fighter downings, but also due to a combination of recurring mechanical failures and operational accidents, often exacerbated by the stressful conditions of combat. The accounts of pilots who operated the HS-129 are marked by a strong duality. Some described spectacularly successful missions, where its firepower devastated Soviet tank columns, becoming true heroes of the battlefield. Others, however, recounted the constant terror of flying a machine that, with a single shot to its weak point, could turn into a death trap of fire and metal. This perception of constant vulnerability profoundly affected pilot morale and confidence. The HS-129 never enjoyed widespread popularity, not even among the pilots who flew it. It was perceived as heavy, slow, and often doomed to failure before it even accomplished its mission. Despite its shortcomings, it represented a significant conceptual evolution in military aviation. The HS-129 was one of the first to realize the idea of an aircraft specialized in close air support and armored vehicle hunting. Its conception as a dedicated ground attack platform with the ability to carry heavy armament to destroy tanks anticipated trends that would define modern aerial warfare. It is plausible to argue that without the HS-129, iconic machines like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, might not have come into existence or would have undergone a different development. The HS-129 demonstrated the necessity and viability of dedicated aerial tank hunters in an increasingly mechanized battlefield. Although the price of their experience was terribly high in terms of losses and sacrifices, it paved the way for more effective and safer aircraft in the future. The HS-129 embodies the image of the tank hunter with a deadly belly. It was a relentless machine in its attacking capabilities, capable of inflicting severe damage on enemy armor. However, this ferocity was accompanied by an intrinsic vulnerability, making it all too susceptible to survival in a hostile combat environment. Created with the purpose of terrorizing enemy tanks, the HS-129 ultimately etched its name in military aviation history as one of the Luftwaffe's most daring and simultaneously tragic aircraft. Its trajectory is a testament to the relentless pursuit of innovative solutions in times of war, even if their execution resulted in a precarious balance between genius and fragility. It is precisely this dichotomy between the audacity of its concept and the fragility of its execution that makes the HS-129 such a fascinating and at times melancholic chapter in the history of military aviation. It represents a grim reminder that in war, the price of innovation can be measured in lives and machines lost.